We were never supposed to land there. The detour order came down because our reactor monitor flagged a coolant imbalance, and the nearest dust-free strip on any chart belonged to a colony nobody had filed a report on in 300 years. Routine diversion. Routine repair. I packed my kit, because that's what a ground medic does when the ship goes anywhere, not because I expected to use it. The world had a name once. The charts just called it Designate 14, abandoned status, no current claim. From orbit it looked like a held breath. Thin pale sky, a single brown landmass, scoured down to bedrock and dust, and at its center, a tower standing very straight against all that flatness, like someone had forgotten to knock it down. We came in at midday, because that was the safest light for an unscheduled landing, and the dust came up around the skids in a slow gold curtain that took a long time to settle. My first thought, stepping out, was that the air still smelled faintly of something green that hadn't grown there in a long time. The tower was the only structure still standing. Everything else, what must have been a settlement once, low foundations, the bones of irrigation lines, had gone to rust and drift. But the tower's beacon dish still turned, slow, patient, a quarter rotation every few seconds, like a man checking the same door for the 1,000th time out of habit rather than hope. Our pilot, Reyes, found the source while I was still getting my bearings. A status channel, she said, looping the same packet for who knew how long. Not an SOS, not a code, just routine telemetry. Reservoir levels, soil salinity, structural integrity reports on buildings that had stopped existing 100 years before anyone was reading them. The kind of report a maintenance system files because filing reports is what it does, whether or not there's an empire left to receive them. It's not calling anyone, Reyes said. It's just working. We went up the tower because that's what you do when something that old is still drawing power, and you want to know why before you sit beside it for 6 hours fixing a coolant line. The climb was longer than it looked. At the top, in a room with one intact window, we found it. Not a person, never a person, but the thing that had been doing the person's job. A squat custodian unit, dust-caked, one tread worn through to the frame, still rolling its slow circuit between a bank of readouts and the window, recording what there was nothing left to record. It didn't react to us. It had stopped reacting to anything a long time before we existed to it. But it was still moving, still logging, still sending, into a network whose other half had been gone for centuries, the same patient report it had been sending since the last evacuation transport lifted off, and never told it to stop. I crouched by its tread and read what I could of the readouts over its shoulder, if a machine like that can be said to have one. The numbers meant almost nothing to me. Soil pH for crops dead generations ago, a water table long since dropped below its own sensors, structural ratings for a granary that existed now only as a discolored rectangle in the dust below. It logged all of it anyway, in the same flat, careful hand a person might use writing a letter they knew would never be opened, simply because the alternative was to stop, and stopping had apparently never been one of its instructions. Reyes crouched down next to it and watched the slow quarter turn of its sensor head toward the window and back. "How long's the power cell been running on backup?" she asked. Not really to either of us. "Longer than it should. There's nothing left here to charge it. Whatever's keeping it moving now is mostly momentum and stubbornness." "That's most of us. Most days," she said, and went back to checking the line. I want to be honest about what we felt, because I think people imagine it was grander than it was. Nobody cried. Nobody saluted. Reyes just stood there a long moment, with her hand resting on the doorframe, the way you'd touch a wall in a house where somebody used to live. Then she said, 300 years, and didn't finish the sentence, because there wasn't really a way to finish it that meant anything more than the two words already did. We fixed the coolant line. That took until evening, and it was near evening, with the light going long and amber across all that dust, that the second ship came down. It wasn't ours, and it wasn't a warning. One vessel, old pattern hull, the kind a family might have kept running for 2 generations past its retirement date. It set down a respectful distance from us, and sat there a while before anyone came out. The man who climbed down alone was older than I expected, gray at the temples, wearing a traveling coat with a faded clan mark stitched at the collar. The kind you only see on people who left somewhere as children and came back as something else. He stood at the base of the tower and looked up at it the way you look at a grave you've been meaning to visit for half your life. His name was Vren Kalvash. He told us, later, sitting on the ramp of our own ship because his legs had given out somewhere around the third question he didn't ask, that he'd been born in the settlement at the foot of that tower, in the last year before the evacuation. He didn't remember the leaving. He remembered being told about it his whole life, the order, the transports, the way his mother used to describe the dust rising behind them as they lifted off, like the world itself reaching after the ship. He hadn't come because of a signal. He didn't know there was one. He'd come because he was old now, and there are some places a person needs to stand in once before they're done, and this was his. He told us about the leaving, the way people tell stories they've heard told to them, more than they've lived. The transports lifting in a staggered queue because there weren't enough engines to take everyone at once, and his mother carrying him instead of the one trunk she'd packed, because in the end, you choose the child over the keepsakes and live with what you lost. His family kept a photograph of the tower for 2 generations afterward, the way other families kept photographs of people. He found us instead. Found, at the top of his family's dead world, a human patrol crew standing over the only thing that had stayed. "You picked this up," he said, when we told him about the channel. It wasn't a question, not really, but I answered it like one. "We weren't looking for it," I said. "We came down for our own ship. The signal was just, already here. It had been calling for 300 years. Not to us. Not to anyone, really. Just reporting." He was quiet a long time. Then he said the custodian's name, not its designation, an actual name, the kind a child gives something it loves. And I understood that he had grown up with that machine's slow circuit as the last sound of his world before the evacuation took it from him, and that no part of him had ever stopped expecting it to still be there, doing exactly what it had always done. "It wasn't asking for help," he said. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't asking for anything. It was just still doing its job." He looked at our ship a while, looked at the tower. I think he was doing the arithmetic of all the years that had passed with nobody on either end listening, and what it meant that the one report finally reached somebody anyway, even if that somebody had never been the intended audience, and couldn't undo a single one of those 300 years. We didn't have orders for what came next, because nothing about this had a category. There was no distress to answer, no rescue to perform, no treaty to invoke, so we did the only thing that made sense to any of us standing there in the dust, with the light going down. We helped him carry what little he wanted to take, a control core from the custodian, intact enough that its logs could be read properly, slow and complete, by people who'd actually known the names in them. We stayed the night so he wouldn't make the climb back to his ship alone in the dark. In the morning, we filed our coolant repair and noted, almost as an afterthought, that the colony's old status beacon had finally been retired by the one person left with the right to do it. Before we lifted off, Reyes asked him what he'd say if anyone ever asked why a human patrol ship spent 2 days on an abandoned world, answering a signal that was never meant for them. He thought about it for a while, watching the tower shrink below us through the viewport. "Tell them," he said, "that it was still working when you found it. Tell them that's reason enough." I've thought about that more than I expected to, in the years since. We never got a commendation for it, just filed it as a maintenance stop with an unscheduled passenger. But I keep the custodian's name written on a card I carry, the way you'd keep a name you were asked to remember on someone else's behalf. Some signals aren't a cry for help. Some are just proof that someone, or something, kept doing the work long after anyone was left to notice. And that turns out to be enough to bring a ship down out of a clear sky, 300 years too late to matter, and exactly in time to matter anyway.